The history of the British Empire is one of immense complexity and global impact, representing one of the largest domains in history. At its zenith, it was often metaphorically described as the empire on which the sun never sets, illustrating its vast reach across all inhabited continents. This empire began modestly in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, with scattered settlements and trading posts. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, it had expanded to dominate approximately 25% of the world's land surface, including large parts of North America, Australia, Africa, and Asia. The scale of the empire was not only geographical, but also demographic, influencing the lives of hundreds of millions of people. Power was backed by the dominance of the Royal Navy, which ruled the seas, facilitating not only expansion, but also control of trade routes and colonies. This naval force allowed Britain to accumulate wealth and resources from around the world, which fueled industrial innovations in the country. The British Empire also left a lasting legacy in the political, linguistic, and cultural landscapes of its former colonies. English became a lingua franca in many parts of the world, and British legal and political systems influenced international norms and practices. In this video, we will explore how the British Empire rose to dominate the world, the mechanisms of its governance, its cultural and economic impacts. This introduction sets the stage for a deeper exploration of the forces that propelled Britain to such heights and the complex legacies that remain in the post-colonial world. The seeds of the British Empire were sown during a time of intense maritime exploration and competition with other European powers. England, initially lagging behind Spain and Portugal in overseas exploration, began to establish its presence in the late 16th century, under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. In the Americas, the first successful English settlement was established in 1607 in Jamestown, Virginia. This venture, primarily aimed at finding gold and a passage to the east, eventually laid the groundwork for more English settlements along the east coast. The pursuit of religious freedom also drove English Puritans to establish the Plymouth colony in 1620, marking the beginning of significant migration that would shape the development of North America. The English were not only settlers, they were also involved in the lucrative tobacco and cotton trade, which became economic pillars for the colonies. These early years were marked by both cooperation and violent conflicts with Native American tribes, whose lands the settlers were encroaching upon. In Asia, the approach was different. The British, through the East India Company founded in 1600, sought to tap into the already flourishing trade networks of spices, silk, and other goods. Instead of immediately establishing colonies, they set up trading posts and interacted diplomatically and militarily with the established powers in India and the Spice Islands. The East India Company played a crucial role in setting the stage for the empire by not only managing trade, but eventually exercising military and administrative power as well. By the mid-18th century, it had become a state within a state in India, laying the groundwork for the complete British control that would follow in the 19th century. These early colonization efforts in America and Asia were driven by a mix of economic ambition, strategic considerations, and sometimes religious motivations. They established the pattern for the expansion and administration of the British Empire, demonstrating from the start how trade, conflict, and culture could intertwine to build an empire. The Elizabethan Era, marked by the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, was a golden age of English exploration and naval power. During this period, England began to assert itself on the global stage, challenging the dominance of the Spanish and Portuguese empires. Central to this effort were the bold voyages of privateers and explorers, sanctioned by the Queen, which ranged between piracy and patriotism. Sir Francis Drake is perhaps the most iconic of these figures. As a privateer and explorer, Drake's voyages were fundamental in expanding English knowledge of the world and disrupting the maritime monopolies of rival powers. His circumnavigation of the globe from 1577 to 1580 not only enriched England with Spanish booty, but also established English presence in previously inaccessible territories. Privateers like Drake operated under letters of marque, legal documents issued by the Crown that authorized them to attack and plunder enemy ships, sharing the spoils with the English government. This practice was crucial in weakening Spain's naval resources without the need for a formal war, for which England was poorly equipped at the time. Drake's impact extended beyond his maritime achievements. His feats were celebrated in England as heroic tales, arousing national pride and providing inspiration for further explorations and expansions. His success laid the foundation for the evolution of England's maritime strategy, which emphasized agile and fast ships that could easily maneuver around larger fleets. Moreover, explorers like John Hawkins and Walter Raleigh contributed to England's imperial ambitions by seeking new lands for settlement and resources. Raleigh, for example, was instrumental in the attempts to colonize Virginia, an effort that, despite its initial failure, sparked continued interest in American colonization. The Elizabethan sailors not only paved the way for England's expansion into an empire, but also fostered a maritime tradition that would become the backbone of British imperial power. Their adventures marked the beginning of England's transformation from a peripheral European power into a global naval force, setting the stage for centuries of expansion that followed. The initial incursions of the British Empire into colonization began in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, with the establishment of settlements that would become the pillars of its vast territorial empire. Simultaneously, the English were also making their mark in the Caribbean, an area rich in lucrative sugar plantations. The island of Barbados, claimed in the name of King James in 1627, quickly became an economic powerhouse for England. Sugar, along with tobacco from the colonies in North America, drove the economic engine that financed further colonial expansion. The Caribbean islands became a focal point for the British, leading to the establishment of more colonies such as Jamaica in 1655, taken from the Spanish. These islands were integral to the Atlantic triangular trade, a network involving the exchange of slaves from Africa, sugar, and other goods from America, and manufactured products from Europe. These early colonies not only expanded British territorial claims, but also tested and shaped the administrative and economic models that would later be applied throughout the empire. The plantation economies, built on the backs of enslaved African labor, created immense wealth. In addition, the governance structures established in these colonies, such as representative assemblies and local councils, served as early examples of British colonial administration, balancing local governance with oversight from London. These systems would be replicated and modified elsewhere in the empire, reflecting a pattern of indirect rule that allowed varying degrees of local autonomy. The first colonies in the Americas and the Caribbean were not merely settlements, but laboratories for the economic and political structures that would define British imperialism. Their successes and failures profoundly influenced later expansion strategies across the globe. The Royal Navy was the axis of the British Empire, an unmatched force that played a critical role in its expansion and maintenance. From the 18th century onward, as the empire grew, so too did the need for a powerful navy to protect its widespread interests, enforce its maritime laws, and secure its trade routes across the world. The road to dominance by the Royal Navy began in earnest during the wars with the Dutch and the Spanish in the 16th and 17th centuries, where they perfected their tactics and expanded their capabilities. By the time of the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century, the British Navy had established itself as the world's leading naval power. The Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, where Admiral Horatio Nelson secured a monumental victory against the combined fleets of France and Spain, symbolized this supremacy. This victory effectively secured British control of the seas for the next century. Control of the seas allowed Britain to protect its merchant ships traversing the globe, transporting goods from the farthest reaches of the empire back to the home islands and vice versa. This naval force was crucial for maintaining the security of trade routes that channeled wealth to Britain from its colonies. Moreover, the Royal Navy played an integral role in establishing new colonies, often providing the necessary force to claim and then defend distant territories. The Navy also enforced British policy and interests around the world, including the suppression of the slave trade in the 19th century. Following the abolition of the slave trade in 1607, the West Africa Squadron was tasked with intercepting ships suspected of carrying slaves, demonstrating how naval power was used to enforce the moral and legal standards set by the government. Beyond war and trade, the Royal Navy acted as a floating representation of sovereignty and a deterrent against potential adversaries. The presence of British warships in strategic locations around the world served as a constant reminder of the reach and power of the empire, helping to maintain a semblance of order and compliance within the empire. The Royal Navy was often at the forefront of maritime technological innovations, from adopting the chronometer for precise navigation to transitioning from sail to steam. These advancements not only maintained its edge over rivals, but also allowed for faster and more effective deployment of ships wherever they were needed. Throughout its history, the British Empire was shaped and expanded through a series of significant wars and conflicts. These military engagements not only secured new territories, but also reinforced Britain's dominance on the global stage. Often described as the First World War, the 7 Years' War was crucial in establishing Britain as the world's preeminent colonial power. This conflict spanned Europe, North America, West Africa, India, and the Philippines, involving all major European powers. Fought primarily between Britain and France, each supported by various allies, the British emerged victorious. In North America, significant territories were acquired, including Canada and Florida, effectively eliminating the French threat to the colonies in the region. Meanwhile, in India, the East India Company secured its dominance over French posts, laying the groundwork for complete British control in the following decades. The Napoleonic Wars were another series of global conflicts that further expanded the empire. Britain's naval victory at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 secured its naval supremacy, which allowed unrestricted access to the seas and its colonies. Following Napoleon's defeat, the Congress of Vienna in 1815 resulted in territorial gains in several regions, including the strategic island of Malta and expansions in the Caribbean and Africa. These conflicts set the stage for another significant, though controversial, chapter in the history of the British Empire, the Opium Wars against China. Originating from trade disputes and Britain's desire to address the trade imbalance with China by exporting opium from India to China, these wars reshaped the geopolitical landscape of East Asia. The treaties that concluded these wars, notably the Treaty of Nanking in 1842, resulted in the cession of Hong Kong to Britain and the opening of several Chinese ports to British traders, significantly increasing the economic reach of the empire in Asia. Following its global ambitions, the Anglo-Zulu War emerged as part of Britain's expansion in Africa. The British victory in this conflict resulted in the control of the Zulu kingdom and subsequently the consolidation of British territories in South Africa. Known for its dramatic battles and the strong initial resistance of the Zulu nation, this war marked another milestone in British imperial enterprises. These and other conflicts not only expanded the territorial boundaries of the empire, but also played a fundamental role in defining its character. Military confrontations allowed Britain to control strategic trade routes, acquire new markets, and impose its influence over vast areas of the world. However, these wars also entailed significant human costs and laid the groundwork for resistance movements in various colonies. Moreover, British involvement in the transatlantic slave trade was both extensive and profoundly impactful, shaping the economic landscapes of the British Empire and its colonies for over 2 centuries. Initially, the Crown entered the slave trade at the end of the 16th century, but it was not until the 17th and 18th centuries that it became a cornerstone of its economic strategy. The trade involved the forced transportation, persecution, and kidnapping of millions of Africans from their homeland to various colonies across the Americas, treated as emotionless objects. The profits generated from human trafficking and forced labor were fundamental in building the economic foundations of British colonies, particularly in the Caribbean. The plantations that produced sugar, tobacco, and cotton, reliant on slave labor, became highly profitable enterprises that drove wealth generation for investors and broader economic development of the empire. The slave trade was part of a broader system known as the triangular trade, which connected Britain, Africa, and the Americas. British goods were sent to Africa and traded for enslaved people, who were then cruelly transported across the Atlantic, a journey known as the Middle Passage, to the Americas, where they were exchanged for raw materials that were then sent back to Britain. This system not only generated enormous economic profits, but also had devastating human costs, causing psychological suffering, trauma, depression, and despair among those forced to be separated from their families. The inhumane conditions of the Middle Passage and the brutal treatment of the enslaved on plantations led to immense suffering and numerous uprisings. Resistance among the enslaved and the growing abolitionist sentiment in Britain gradually changed public opinion against the trade. The movement to abolish the slave trade gained significant momentum in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Figures such as William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and Olaudah Equiano played key roles in the abolitionist movement, advocating for the end of the trade through parliamentary campaigns and public advocacy. The Slave Trade Act was finally passed in 1807, making it illegal to trade slaves within the British Empire. However, slavery itself was not abolished in the British colonies until the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833. The abolition of the slave trade marked an important moral and legal victory, but its legacy persisted, affecting generations. The economic benefits derived from the slave trade had already helped establish Britain as a global economic power. Today, this legacy requires ongoing reflection and action, including efforts toward reconciliation and reparations for the descendants of enslaved people. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 18th century, was a transformative period that revolutionized not only the British economy, but also its imperial reach. The advent of new manufacturing processes and technologies dramatically increased production capabilities, reduced costs, and enhanced British military and economic power, enabling greater control and expansion of the empire. The development of the steam engine by James Watt and its subsequent improvements was perhaps the most significant technological advance of the Industrial Revolution. Steam power was crucial in both industry and transportation. It allowed more efficient pumping of water from mines, powered machinery in textile factories, and later propelled locomotives and steamships. These steamships enabled faster and more reliable goods and passenger transport across seas, tightening Britain's control over its extensive colonies. The expansion of the railway network, driven by steam locomotives, revolutionized land transport. In the colonies, railways facilitated the rapid and efficient movement of raw materials to ports for shipment to Britain. For example, in India, railways enabled the transport of cotton, coal, and later troops, deepening and securing British control while integrating the subcontinent economically and administratively. Another revolutionary innovation was the electric telegraph, developed by Samuel Morse. This technology allowed instant communication over long distances and was a radical change for colonial administration. The first successful transatlantic cable, laid in 1866, connected Britain with North America, enabling almost instantaneous communication with its colonies. This capability was essential for maintaining order, coordinating military efforts, and making swift administrative decisions. Advancements in iron and steel production, particularly with the introduction of processes like the Bessemer converter, dramatically increased the availability and reduced the cost of these crucial materials. Steel became the material of choice for building railways, ships, and various structures, including those necessary for colonial infrastructure and defense. Mechanized textile production innovations in textile machinery, such as the spinning jenny, water frame, and mechanical loom, dramatically increased the production capacity of British mills. This not only strengthened Britain's position as the world's leading textile manufacturer, but also allowed it to dominate the global textile trade, influencing economies in both its colonies and competitors. The increased production and efficiency brought about by these technologies made Britain the workshop of the world, creating vast wealth that further fueled imperial ambitions. However, this rapid industrialization also led to significant social changes within Britain and its colonies. The demand for raw materials incentivized further colonial expansion and exploitation, while the export of British manufactured goods negatively impacted local industries in the colonies. The technologies of the Industrial Revolution were instrumental in the expansion of the British Empire. They not only enhanced Britain's military and economic dominance, but also fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of the era. The empire, built on industrial innovations, was equipped to manage vast territories, control extensive trade networks, and influence global affairs like no other empire before. Cultural imperialism was a significant aspect of the British Empire's strategy to maintain control over its vast territories. Through the deliberate export of its culture, values, and institutions, Britain sought not only to govern, but also culturally reshape its colonies. One of the most profound tools of British cultural imperialism was the English language. Promoted in schools and governmental institutions throughout the colonies, English became the lingua franca for administration, commerce, and education. This linguistic expansion had the dual effect of creating a class of English-speaking elites in the colonies, who often facilitated British governance and weakening indigenous languages and cultural practices. The British introduced Western educational systems into their colonies, establishing schools and universities that followed British curricula and emphasized British historical and cultural perspectives. This educational system was designed to train local leaders who would uphold British interests and administrative styles, thereby ensuring smoother governance that aligned with imperial policies. British legal and administrative practices were another pillar of cultural imperialism. The implementation of the British judicial system, including the framework of common law, courts, and legal procedures, served to standardize governance and secure control. These systems often displaced traditional legal practices and were used to reinforce the economic and political agendas of the empire. The spread of Christianity was actively supported by the British government and missionary societies, who saw the colonies as fertile ground for religious conversion. Missionaries often accompanied colonizers and became an integral part of the colonial administration, providing education and medical care while promoting Western values and norms. Sports such as cricket, soccer, and rugby were introduced and intensively promoted in the colonies as part of British cultural life. These sports became integrated into the social fabric of the colonies, creating a shared cultural space that, although promoting British values, also allowed for the emergence of new hybrid identities and eventually became a source of resistance and colonial pride. British literature, music, and arts were also tools of cultural imperialism. The British promoted their literature and arts as superior, often undermining or marginalizing local cultural productions. However, over time, these influences blended with local cultures to produce unique forms of expression that could both embrace and challenge colonial dominance. The legacy of British cultural imperialism is complex. While it facilitated the spread of British ideals and governance, it also led to the erosion of local cultures and identities. In many former colonies, this legacy is still evident in the continued use of the English language, legal systems, and other cultural norms. However, it also sparked movements to reclaim and revitalize indigenous cultures and languages as post-colonial societies sought to redefine their identities. The success of the British Empire in maintaining control over its global territories was largely due to its complex and adaptable administrative systems. These structures varied widely from one colony to another, adapted to local conditions, but always intended to maintain British authority and facilitate the economic exploitation of the colonies.